Dragon Lore Part 2, going over the first brood. But before we do that, let's start with the king of all dragons, Midgardsormr. He is not just the king of all dragons, but the father of all dragons. Yes, every single one. What came before Midgardsormr, you ask? We don't know. Perhaps nothing. He's just been around forever as far as our knowledge goes. As we went over in the previous videos, dragons are aliens from another planet, and Midgardsormr is the reason they're all here. He arrived at Hraesvelgr near the start of the First Era and agreed to guard Silvertear Falls. He brought with him the 7 eggs that would eventually lead to the first brood. He cared for them and raised them. He fought against the Garleans in 1562 and died. But not really. He just sort of sat there for 15 years and stirred again in 1577. 15 years sounds like a lot, but remember, this guy is thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years old. 15 years is like a blink of an eye to him. When he eventually did stir, he was greeted by the Warrior of Light. A battle occurred where the Warrior of Light seemed to strike down the Worm King's spirit. But fun fact, no. Midgardsormr was merely testing them and found them wanting. Long story short, he was about to squish him, but was stopped by Hraesvelgr. He decided then to follow the Warrior of Light and watch, listen, and judge their actions. He created an apparition to house his undying spirit. The most adorable teeny dragon. It is so cute. This drawing of him is just pure happiness. Look at it. He's one of the most powerful entities in the entire Final Fantasy XIV universe, and he's just adorable. Moving on. Now we can start with the first brood. The 7 great worms directly born of Midgardsormr. Those who are the greatest and most powerful dragons. There is Bahamut, the Dawn Worm. Tiamat, the Dusk Worm. Hraesvelgr, the White Worm. Ratatoskr, the Curious Worm. Nidhogg, the Black Worm. Azdaja, unknown title. Vrtra, unknown title. Bahamut. He, along with Tiamat, his brood sister and consort, don't think about it, flew south and decided to raise a brood together on the continent of Mericidia. Eventually, mortal men arrived to the continent, where Bahamut and Tiamat welcomed them. The people of Mericidia venerated the dragons, and thus a strong bond of friendship was formed between man and dragon. A bond so strong that Bahamut saw the mortals and their cities as part of his horde. He was very often approached by mortals to judge and mediate quarrels. Quite simply, Bahamut was a very friendly dragon who cared about everyone living on the Mericidian continent and was effectively a beloved king for all. Unfortunately, that is not the memory we have of him, as it was tarnished by the Tyrant King's shade of rage and anger that brought about the 7th umbral calamity. Tiamat. She who flew south with her brood brother and, beloved, to live peacefully on the continent of Mericidia, and they raised a brood together. She was a leader and revered greatly by the mortals of Mericidia. Though we do not know this for certain, it is highly likely she also flew against the Alligans and fought against them. But she was ultimately captured and placed in a prison in Azdaja. She had dwelt for 5 millennia imprisoned within Azdaja, and had done nothing but lament her actions of calling Bahamut's spirit back. Story spoilers, click here to avoid. The latest patch, at the time of recording patch 5.5, she once again flies free and leads the dragons of Miracidia. The next 3 dragons have Heavensward story spoilers, so here's the time if you want to avoid that. Hraesvelgr. He claims command over ice and holy light. In around year 370, there was great tension between the Ishgardians and the dragons living in Dravania and Corphas. And by tension, I mean they were at war, busy killing each other. But in this year, Hraesvelgr was approached by an Elezen maiden, Shiva. She hoped to parley with the Great Worm in order to stop the conflict between dragon and man. But the parley resulted in the two falling in love, as they found soulmates within each other. This love greatly upset Hraesvelgr, for he is an effectively immortal dragon, and the lifespan of an Elezen is to them what a single day is to us. Shiva felt his pain and sorrow, and, also being unable to bear their eventual separation, begged him to consume her, so that their spirit may forever be entwined. Hraesvelgr was first appalled and disgusted at the request, and refused. "Hey honey, I'm so sad we're gonna be separated eventually. Please eat me." Excuse me? Well, that way I can be inside you and we can be together. Forever. No? But if we're but we'll be separated. Eat me! Shiva was very persistent at this, and eventually he relented to her pleas. The Great Worm consumed his Elezen lover Shiva, and through some magics of this event, their souls became entwined for eternity. Their story moved the hearts of men and dragon alike, and the war was ended. For about 200 years, because the mortals eventually did something to the Great Worm Ratatoskr. Hraesvelgr's domain is the Four Arms, and extends southward to include Greensward and Mogholm. The Towers of Zenith is the structure he most oft resides on, and where his brood centers themselves around. He and his brood guard the structures within his domain, out of respect for his beloved Shiva. He has even tasked the Mughals in restoring some of the structures. Ratatoskr, the curious dragon. She who was filled with wanderlust, and she who was known as the bearer of all the dragon's songs, and shared them openly. Dragon's songs being how dragons record their knowledge, meaning she was a keeper of knowledge, and travelled from one corner of a world to another, teaching any who wanted to learn. Apparently the way she sang these songs, taught her lessons, were so amazing that they were known to move the hearts and minds of both dragons and mortals. Through her travels, she would also visit her brood siblings, often bringing tidings and news between them. She and her brood was what connected all the dragons together. She was also incredibly curious. You know, the whole The Curious Dragon title. She wanted to know everything, and due to her having a practically everlasting lifespan, and having also lived for an incredibly long time, she was basically a living library with a vast amount of knowledge. And she spread all this knowledge openly and freely to anyone who asked. She cared deeply for the races of men and worked passionately to establish a lasting peace between them. But all this love, care, and trust is what led to her eventual downfall. She did not, or perhaps even could not, fathom the depth of mortals' avarice, and she openly revealed to the then King of Ishgard, King Fordan I, the secret of the Great Worm's power. And in year 550, King Fordan and his 12 knights lured out and ambushed Ratatoskr. It is unlikely she put up much of a fight. Since she completely trusted the mortals, she likely had her guard completely down. She was murdered, and her eyes consumed. A bit of a tangent, but I feel it's important and interesting. After Ratatoskr's murder, there was a lot more tragedy, for much of her brood felt when she died. And in the shock and grief of her death, along with the fact that this mortal race that they considered friends betrayed them, most of her brood ended up taking their own lives. Those who didn't abandoned their home and scattered to the winds, hardly ever to be seen again. Today, very few members of Ratatoskr's brood remain, and most of those who do continuously fly the skies, Ratatoskr's wanderlust strongly running in their veins. When Ratatoskr was in Eorzea, she lived in what is known today as Sor Kai, sad apology when directly translated from dragon speak. It was renamed to this by the Dravanians who remained in the Churning Mist, in grievance for their failure to protect her from her murder. These are some of the only mortal buildings that Nidhogg's brood would never attack. To put it simply, the damage of this dragon's murder by mortal affected a great many dragons and people, but arguably none were more enraged by this event than her brood brother, the great black worm, Nidhogg. Nidhogg did not trust the mortals like the other dragons, but he tolerated them at the behest of his king and to not break the peace they held. This may be difficult to believe by many adventurers due to the raging, burning hatred he held for mankind, but he actually would never harm a mortal. He even allowed the mortals to build great structures within his territory, Orntan, bone stand in dragon speak. This here is roughly his territory. The Rookery was a place that once was a bustling skyport where mortals and dragons would come together, meet, and then go on adventures together. Gromrai, praying tree in dragon speak, used to be a beautiful lush green forest where mortals would often walk and explore. Safton Walls was once a defensive line that was held together by knights of Ishgard and dragons. Eastern Eyes was a resting quarter for Ishgardian knights. This is also where Ishgardian knights would meet worms, whom they would mount up on and then fly and patrol the skies together. Western Waters was a place of leisure specifically made for mortals to relax and rest in the waters, but of course there were probably dragons just chilling there with them. And then there's the Eyrie. This used to be a castle where the honored king of men dwelled. Yes, Nidhogg let the mortals build a castle in his territory. There were a lot of mortal structures in his territory. Nidhogg laid waste to every last one of them and killed everyone there after his sister's murder. For I believe his rage stems from not only the fact that she was murdered, but that she was murdered in the very heart of his territory, at Taln Kash, Crystal from Regret in Dragon Speak. She was surrounded by what should have been guards and sentries to keep her safe. When Nidhogg learned of her murder, he became the aspect of rage and hate we know so well. The place he first struck was Ael Tum. This once was a village on top of Sormal. It's almost completely gone. It is said that he struck so fast and in such a fury that the villagers didn't even know what was attacking them. Nidhogg then called out to his brood, and the bloodbath really started. Knights fell from the sky as their wyverns kicked them off their backs or knocked them off of other dragons' backs. The southern walls were scorched and attacked from without as well as within. Grun Rai was scorched, and the people walking there were burnt and cooked alive. The western waters turned red with Elysian blood, and the Eyrie, well, Nidhogg left no one alive in there. After all this, his rage was not even close to sated. Nidhogg flew to find the mortals who killed his brood sister. He engaged them in combat, killing the king and half of the knights before he fell in battle. But then he was saved by his brood brother, Hraesvelgr. The rest of the story we know well enough. This is how the Dragon Song War started. In a single day, in a flood of blood, carnage, and death. Finally, Azdaja and Vrtra. We know literally nothing about these two. Squat. Nada. Zil. We don't know what they're like, where they went, or even if they're still alive. We know it's unlikely that either of them went to the Far East, since we've been there and there's no trace of dragons. Perhaps they flew together to the New World, or perhaps one ventured into Ilsabard and was slain by the Garlean Empire. We just don't know. Hopefully we'll find out eventually in future expansions and stories, but sorry, there really is nothing we know about these two. We've got a single picture and their names. That's it. Yeah, that brings us to the end of part 2. Next up, we have dragon morphology, biology, and their society. But for now, goodbye my friends, and have a great day.
Bum, 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 bum.